Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for the segment, we have Scott Melker, crypto trader and investor. He's also the host of the Wolf of All Streets podcast and author of the Wolf Den newsletter. Of course, we're going to get his 2022 outlook in the crypto space. Scott, it's great to see you as always. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Thank you so much for having me again.
All right, let's start with where we are heading into the year end. And despite the volatility that Bitcoin and the rest of the crypto space is known for, Bitcoin had quite a remarkable year.
It's been an exceptional year for Bitcoin. It really went from a nascent asset class with a very small, passionate community to something that's gone completely mainstream, both institutionally and with your average retail investor. I literally think that every person in the world basically has heard of Bitcoin or crypto at this point, which was something I could have never even imagined probably 18 months ago. So I think that that momentum will likely carry through into the future and that we're going to see quite a bit of growth in this space.
Right, and Scott, outside of Bitcoin, investors also moved into altcoins and the technology that helps to power the digital asset space, which I think is really quite encouraging to see the trend continue where assets aren't just going into Bitcoin and you're seeing it more even, not as even, but spreading out to other parts of the crypto space.
I would argue that it's actually much more heavily into the other parts than into Bitcoin at some point, which is another thing I wouldn't have told you was going to happen necessarily this year. I actually was having this conversation with Willy Woo, a famous on-chain analyst, this morning. And I basically made the point that we saw Michael Saylor and Tesla coming into Bitcoin, and the expectation was that we would see institutions pouring their money into Bitcoin as a hedge in their treasury. But what we've really seen, I believe, is more of a picks and shovels approach from venture capital and from institutions who are now trying to get in early on the infrastructure builds and all of the future companies that will absolutely explode in this space. And so by that metric, they're really pouring into the altcoins, into the infrastructure projects, and not as much into Bitcoin. I don't think that that means they won't. I think they will continue to, but I think we'll see much more growth on the venture capital and infrastructure side.
And with NFTs, we've seen them grow with enormous popularity this year. Is this something that is here to stay?
NFTs are absolutely here to stay. What you're seeing is the very first iteration of what they can do, right? I don't know that JPEG art necessarily will carry through. I do believe that there's a bit of a bubble there. The early projects with a passionate community will do well, but most of them were arguably money grabs that will probably go to zero with time. But an NFT, if you really think about it, is a way to transfer a scarce asset or any asset from one party to another without a third party toll collector in between. And when you consider what that means for transferring value between one party to another, basically the options are literally endless for how it can be used. As far as art, I think we will see it continue to grow. But really, when you start thinking about transferring your mortgage or your car title or any proof of ownership of anything, it gets very, very exciting.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. For those of us who bought homes, title insurance and all that can easily be fixed with the kind of technology that's out there.
Right.
But, back to NFTs for a moment. We've seen a lot of artists and entertainers and sports players really flock to that space. Does it allow them to have, let's say, more control over their likeness or more control over the content that they're putting out?
I think the answer to that is nuanced. I think it can, but generally probably does not. But I think that that's because a lot of celebrities understandably are coming into the space without a really deep understanding of how it can be used and what's important about it. And they come off a bit like money grabs and largely are not successful. But there's, projects like Royal Blau, a famous DJ, has started that's going to allow fractional ownership of music, fractional ownership in an artist, things like that. And that gives artists complete control and can effectively eliminate those third parties once again, which I talked about before as the main use case for NFTs, and really allow those artists to take control of their own destiny and allow them to monetize that alongside their audience and their fans who can get a piece of the upside.
Right. I was watching your show this morning, and one of the comments was quite interesting. Someone had asked you the question when we think about Evergrande and what's happening there, and there really has not been much noise as of recent in the S&P 500 and stocks in general, but it seems as if the crypto market moved off of it a little bit more. Any thoughts around that?
Well, stocks only go up, right?
Right.
Right. Sarcasm. But I would argue that crypto has not necessarily reacted to it either. I think that it's priced in and everybody's been anticipating it. And largely we understand that the Chinese government has been dealing with it and there's going to be a restructuring of that debt that's probably been underway for quite a while, long before this default. So I do believe that news is priced in. As for crypto, it moved a few days ago and now is suffering from the tail end of that weakness. And I don't think what we're seeing today has very much to do with the Evergrande news. I think it's just, once again, traders, the technical side, liquidations and leverage, as the story always goes.
Right. It's kind of like crypto is doing crypto. So Scott, naturally you have a crystal ball, just like everybody else. When we look at, your
Yes.
outlook going into 2022, I've had people on the show, it could get to 70,000, it could get to 140 to 160 in the first half of the year. Is that feasible? And what's that going to take? Institutional adoption? Is it going to take more products that are packaged and regulated to come into the system?
I think it's a bit of all of that, right? Or, yeah, as you said, I don't have a crystal ball. It could be none of that, right? We could just see an absolute retail explosion and people could pour into it and it could continue up. My feeling is that the bullishness in the short term has been dampened a bit by recent price action. I think there was a lot of hype and excitement around the Bitcoin futures ETF, which people came to realize very quickly was a subpar product that didn't necessarily want too much exposure to, and that likely it was better to just have exposure to the underlying asset. And so I think we're seeing sort of the profit taking at the end of the year that's dampening that, the sort of FOMO upside that people were predicting 135,000, 170,000 by the end of the year. That said, I think we can chop sideways, consolidate here for a while, weeks, months, I have no idea. And I do think that then 22 will absolutely explode across the market, not just in Bitcoin.
Right, and that's what makes it so fun to trade, isn't it, Scott? As always, thanks so much.
It is.
Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.